Have you ever noticed how silence can feel heavier than noise? How sitting alone, surrounded by familiar walls, the sunlight soft on the floor, can still carry a kind of emptiness. Not the kind the body complains about, but a weight the soul seems to hold, quiet, invisible, yet undeniable. We often think of aging in terms of the body, the stiffness of joints, the slowing of steps, the fading of memory. But what if the real burden of growing older isn't in the bones, but in the heart? What if the heaviest load comes from the things we never set down? Old regrets, hidden disappointments, roles we've outgrown, and stories we keep replaying. This isn't about chasing youth or fixing yourself. It's about something gentler, something slower, a remembering. Because maybe the most important part of this chapter of your life isn't about adding more, but releasing, letting go, not to lose, but to return to lightness, to presence, to peace. So in these next few minutes, let's quietly explore 7 things the soul may no longer need to carry. 1. The freedom of letting go. Sometimes the heaviest burdens we carry are not visible to anyone else. They are not wars or storms or tragedies. They are the quiet piles of things, both physical and emotional, that sit around us, whispering of what used to be. Clutter is often misunderstood as only the dust and disorder in our homes. But clutter also gathers in our thoughts, in our emotions, and even in our memories. A shelf stacked with broken items, a heart tangled in old regrets, or a mind rehearsing conversations from years ago, all are forms of the same weight. There is a story of a woman named Amira who worked tirelessly in her garden. She planted more flowers than her yard could hold, cared for each one as though it were a child, and yet never felt at peace. One day, her neighbor asked why she worked from sunrise to sunset with no rest. Amira admitted she kept planting because she feared the silence that would come if she stopped. She was filling the soil not out of joy, but out of fear. In time, she realized her garden had become like her mind, overgrown, crowded, and weary. When she began to let certain plants go, space opened, and the beauty she sought had been there all along. Another story comes from a teacher I once met named Rowan. He used to collect clocks, dozens of them, filling every wall of his home. Each tick reminded him of time slipping away, yet he could not stop buying more. One evening, when a visitor asked how he could rest with so many ticking voices around him, Rowan laughed softly and said, "I can't." Slowly, he gave away the clocks, keeping only one. "Now," he said, "I hear the silence between the seconds, and that is where peace lives." These stories reveal something simple yet profound. Letting go is not about erasing what we love, but about clearing the excess that keeps us from seeing clearly. A memory does not live inside an object. A relationship is not preserved by a drawer of untouched letters. And so, ask yourself gently, what in your life has become too heavy? What takes up space but gives no life in return? Sometimes freedom begins with a single drawer, a single thought, a single memory released. When we make space outside, we discover space inside. And within that space is the quiet lightness we have been seeking all along. 2. Embrace the gift of time. There are moments in life when the mirror feels like a stranger. The face looking back has changed, lines etching where there were none before, hair silvering with quiet persistence, a body that bends in ways it once did not. And yet, beneath those shifts, the same spirit still resides, carrying the laughter, sorrows, and tenderness of a life fully lived. What unsettles us most is not always the process of aging itself, but the fear of what aging means. In a world that praises youth as the highest form of beauty, growing older is too often seen as decline, as fading, as stepping into invisibility. Commercials promise us creams to erase time, while silence surrounds the deeper truth. To age is not to disappear, but to transform. Centuries ago, a sage named Anand was asked by a young seeker whether he feared old age. His hands shook, his back curved, but his eyes shone clear as still water. "Fear?" he replied with a soft smile. "The body bends as the tree bends in the wind, but the roots remain, and the shade it gives is no less comforting." For him, aging was not a theft, but a ripening. I once knew a violinist named Clara who played in small cafes long after her fingers no longer moved swiftly. One evening, when a string broke mid-song, she simply hummed the melody with her voice. The audience was silent, then in tears. Once, she told me later, I feared losing my hands, but music was never in my fingers. It was in me. She had not grown smaller with age. She had grown deeper. Another man, Samuel, shared a story at 75. He had spent much of his life racing toward goals, career, wealth, recognition. "I used to think I was running out of time," he said. "Now I know time was never running out. It was teaching me to slow down so I could finally arrive." These stories remind us that the fear of aging blinds us to its beauty. Yes, the body shifts, but what softens in return is our grasping, our urgency, our constant hunger for more. In its place grows acceptance, patience, and gratitude. So let me ask you, what if aging is not something pressing against you, but something unfolding within you? What if each wrinkle, each step slower than before, is not a loss, but a doorway into a gentler freedom? To grow older is not to grow lesser. It is, perhaps, to finally grow whole. 3. Releasing the weight of expectations. There is a quiet moment in nearly every life when we realize something we rarely admit. No one else can make us happy. Not partners, not children, not parents, not friends. Others may walk beside us, they may support us, they may love us deeply, but the roots of joy grow only within our own soil. So much of our suffering comes from the expectations we place on those around us. We wait for a word of gratitude from our children, for affection from a partner, for recognition from colleagues. And when it doesn't come, disappointment settles in like dust on forgotten shelves. Yet, what if the disappointment does not lie in them, but in the burden we handed them, expectations they were never meant to carry? There is an old story of a woman named Lena who lived in a village by the sea. She spent years waiting for her grown son to return home, believing that only his presence would bring her peace. Every evening, she prepared his favorite meal, set an extra place at the table, and watched the horizon. One day, an elder visited and asked her why she never ate until the sun disappeared. Lena wept, saying, "I am waiting for my joy to come back." The elder replied gently, "Your joy is not on that boat. It is in the meal you already cooked, in the home you already keep, in the life that is still here." It was then she began to eat again, savoring the warmth of her own company. I once spoke with a man named Darius, who had spent much of his life striving to win his father's approval. Even in his 60s, he confessed he still carried that hunger. One day he said, almost with surprise, "I realized my father never had the words I was waiting for. I was asking him to give me what he himself had never been given." When he released that expectation, the silence between them became less painful. It turned into understanding. These stories remind us that happiness begins where expectation ends. To release the belief that someone else must complete us is not loneliness, it is liberation. It allows us to love without condition, to give without keeping score, and to rest in the knowledge that our joy is ours to cultivate. So I ask you gently, what weight of expectation are you carrying today? Can you loosen your grip and let others be as they are, without demanding they fill what only you can? For in that release lies a lighter, freer way of living. One where love is not a transaction, but a gift, and happiness is not borrowed but rooted within. 4. Letting go of comparison. It often happens without notice, perhaps while scrolling through a photo album, hearing a young voice speak with bold certainty, or watching someone run past your window with the kind of strength you once felt in your own body. A quiet whisper rises, "I used to be like that." If left unchecked, the whisper grows into ache. Where did that version of me go? Why am I not that anymore? Comparison with youth is one of the gentlest but most persistent forms of suffering. It doesn't arrive loudly. It slips in like a shadow, making us measure ourselves against a ruler we no longer need. Energy, beauty, speed, attention. These become unfair benchmarks because the past always seems to outshine the present when we hold them side by side. But pause for a moment. The younger self you long for could not have carried the storms you have weathered. That version of you, bright with possibility, did not yet hold the patience, the resilience, the tenderness that now lives in your bones. The strength you carry today is of a different kind. There is a tale of a teacher named Mara who once asked her students to bring 2 bowls of water. Into the first, she dropped a pebble, and the ripples scattered the reflection. Into the second, still and deep, she dropped the same pebble, yet the reflection remained unbroken. Youth, she said, is like the first bowl, full of energy, but easily unsettled. Age is the second, calm, steady, able to hold even disturbance with grace. I once met a man named Julian in his late 70s who used to love hiking mountain trails. After knee surgery, he could no longer climb the peaks. For months, he avoided even the hills near his home, saying it hurt too much to remember what he'd lost. One day, he decided to sit at the base of the trail with a book. "I thought I would feel useless," he told me, "but I found joy in watching others climb. My eyes could still travel to the top, even if my legs no longer did." His peace came not from reclaiming youth, but from honoring the life before him now. This is the wisdom we are invited into, to allow youth to be youth, and to allow age to be age, without comparison. The Buddha once taught, when we compare, we create distance. When we accept, we create peace. So ask yourself with gentleness, what are you gaining by measuring your now against your then? And what might you discover if you embraced your present not as lesser, but as another chapter, one written in stillness, clarity, and depth? 5. Choosing peace over poison. As the years pass, many of us find ourselves craving peace more than anything else. Not only the peace of quiet rooms or gentle mornings, but the peace that settles inside, a calmness that comes when we no longer feel the need to armor ourselves before every conversation, every visit, every call. And yet, many of us still hold on to relationships that stir up unrest. Sometimes, the hardest truth to face is that those relationships are within our own families. There is a story told about a man named Nalin who lived in a small village. Each month, he visited his cousin, who never missed a chance to belittle him. No matter what Nalin shared, his work, his joys, his struggles, his cousin responded with scorn. Still, Nalin went, because that's what family does. One day, an elder noticed his sadness and asked, "If a well gives you poisoned water, do you keep drinking from it simply because you've known it since childhood?" That question stayed with him. He stopped visiting, not with anger, but with acceptance. In that release, he found space for peace. We are often taught that love means tolerance, that loyalty means enduring harm, that maturity means keeping relationships alive no matter the cost. But this is not wisdom, it is self-abandonment. The Buddha once said, "Holding on to resentment is like carrying a burning torch and wondering why your hands are scorched." Some fires are not meant to be carried. I remember a woman named Aisha, graceful in her 70s, who told me about her sister. For decades, their every conversation ended in criticism and guilt. "But she's my sister," Aisha said. "What kind of person distances herself from her own blood?" She wrestled with that question until one day she gave herself permission to step back. She wrote her sister a kind letter, then closed the door gently. Later, she told me, "It wasn't anger I felt. It was air. I could breathe again." Letting go of toxic relationships is not about shutting people out with bitterness. It is about choosing peace over poison, clarity over confusion, love over fear. To honor your own light is not selfish. It is the beginning of true compassion. Because when your heart is no longer weighed down by harm, it has more room to love freely and more space to welcome connections that nurture instead of diminish. So ask yourself gently, does this relationship water your spirit, or does it drain it drop by drop? You deserve companions who help you grow, not ones who pull you back into shadows. And sometimes, the bravest form of love is the love you show yourself by stepping away. 6. Letting go of regret. There are memories we rarely speak of. They surface in the quiet hours, uninvited. Choices we wish we hadn't made, words we wish we had said, moments when fear or pride kept us silent. These regrets don't shout. They linger like shadows that follow us no matter how bright the day. And slowly they shape the way we carry ourselves. Smiles held back, celebrations dimmed, joy that feels undeserved. For many, regret becomes the heaviest burden in later years. Not the stiffness in our joints or the thinning of our hair, but the weight of what we wish had been different. But the Buddha once taught, "You yourself, as much as anyone in the universe, deserve your love and affection." That includes the younger self, the one who stumbled, the one who didn't yet know what you know now, the one who acted from fear or confusion but still kept moving forward. There is a story of a woman named Sarin who lived much of her early life chasing wealth and reputation. In her old age, she began to see the cost of her choices, friends she neglected, kindness she withheld, love she turned away from. "I wasted so much of my life," she confessed to a teacher. But the teacher only smiled and said, "A river is not judged by where it began, but by where it flows. You cannot change the source, but you can choose the course." From that day, she began volunteering at a small hospice, bringing comfort to the dying. She did not erase her past, but she transformed it. I once met a man named Elias who hadn't spoken to his daughter in 20 years. "I failed her," he whispered. "I wasn't the father she needed." He carried that guilt like a heavy stone in his chest. One evening, he sat down and wrote her a letter, not asking for forgiveness, but offering it to himself. "I release this weight. I cannot change what I was, but I can choose what I am now." Whether or not she replied was no longer the point. For the first time in decades, he felt free enough to breathe deeply. Regret is not meant to be a life sentence. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering with compassion. It is saying, "I did the best I could with what I knew, and now I know better, so I will live better." And when you loosen regret's grip, your hands open to something far more precious, the possibility of beginning again. Which brings us to the last, most persistent illusion, the belief that it's too late. 7. Beyond the lie of too late. There is a quiet sentence that slips into the mind as the years pass. It doesn't always speak aloud, but it lingers. "It's too late for me. Too late to change, too late to learn, too late to begin again." That whisper is not wisdom. It is fear wearing a mask of certainty. Time does not close its hand around us as tightly as we imagine. Yes, the body slows. Yes, the hair whitens. But life continues to move through us as long as we are breathing. The horizon does not end at 70 or 80 or 90. It simply shifts shape. I once knew a woman named Helena who spent decades caring for others, children, parents, even neighbors. At 78, she admitted she no longer knew what she wanted for herself. One day, she joined a local poetry circle just to listen. Within a year, she was writing verses of her own, shyly at first, then with growing courage. "I thought I was too old to begin," she said, "but what I really was finally ready." There was also Martin, who retired at 65 with a heavy sense of finality. For a while, he sat in his chair, watching the days blur together. Then, almost by accident, he began learning a new language online. What started as a way to pass the time became a window into friendship with people across the globe. He laughed when he told me, "I thought the world was shrinking. It turns out, it was just waiting for me to open a new door." These lives remind us that possibility is not bound to age. Possibility belongs to anyone willing to take one step, small, hesitant, imperfect, towards something that stirs the heart. The step does not have to be dramatic. It could be planting a single flower, writing a single sentence, learning a single note of music. Each small act says, "I am still here and I am still becoming." The truth is this: the idea that life closes down after a certain number of birthdays is not reality. It is a story we've been told and too often believed. But you are not your age. You are your aliveness. So ask yourself, not with pressure, but with curiosity, what might awaken in me if I stopped asking, "Is it too late?" and began asking, "What calls to me now?" Because now is not the end. Now is the canvas, and every breath is still a brushstroke. And now, As we come to the close of this quiet journey, pause for a moment. Breathe in deeply and feel the life that still moves through you. All the lessons, the regrets, the burdens, the comparisons, they are part of your story, yet none define the canvas that is still waiting. You have the gentle power to release what no longer serves you, to let go, not to lose, but to return, to presence, to clarity, to lightness. Every step you take, no matter how small, carries the possibility of awakening something new within. Remember Helena, Martin, and all the lives that dared to begin again. Possibility does not belong to youth, nor to a season. It belongs to the one who is willing to breathe, to act, and to arrive. So, what calls to you now? The answer is waiting quietly in this moment.